Hi, everyone. My apologies for having to cancel our third class of the semester. Unfortunately, there was no air conditioning in classroom hall, which made our classroom rather unpleasant. So I did make that executive decision to cancel class. The air conditioning did get turned back on eventually, and finally things started to cool down. I did have my later classes. So I wanted to do this video for you all to make sure that you don't get behind on what was done today. So I am going to share my screen here. So you should be able to see a page that says 1.4 accidentals. So this is from the Music Theory for the 21st Century Classroom online book. You can get to it through the link that is provided in the course syllabus, or if you just type into Google music theory for the, like by the point you start typing it's probably going to pop up for you. And then you can select that. We got through section 1.3 last week, and that's where we were looking at the various notes on the treble clef and also the various notes on the bass clef. So if you recall, treble clef line notes end up being every good boy does fine, you have E, G, B, D, F from bottom to top. If it's space notes, it spells space. When it is bass clef, those line notes bottom to top are G, B, D, F, A, which can be remembered through Good Burritos Don't Fall Apart. And then the space notes from bottom to top, A, C, E, G, can be remembered through All Cows Eat Grass. Of course, last week, then we also looked at keyboards or photos of keyboards at least. So we could figure out how to label the A's, B's, C's, D's, E's, F's, and G's. Those took care of the white keys on a keyboard. So what we're going to do starting with this section 1.4 is start to also explore the black keys as well. So if you follow along with me at the top of the page, it says there are 5 types of accidentals. Accidentals are characters that can be placed before notes to raise or lower them. I have no idea who came up with the term accidentals. It's kind of unfortunate. It sounds like maybe there was a car crash or something like that. It has nothing to do with that. It's just the term that's used for these various types of symbols that sometimes accompany the notes that we see either on a treble clef staff or a bass clef staff. So you can see here there are 5 that are listed in the bullet points there: sharp, flat, double sharp, double flat, and the natural symbol. So the first one at the top there, it says sharp symbol. And then there's the actual symbol there. It kind of looks like a hashtag or tic-tac-toe sign. That's what a sharp symbol looks like. That raises a pitch a half step. Now, one of the built-in problems of this book is you're reading that and you're like, well, what in the world is a half step? Like, it's not terribly helpful if you don't know what that is. Oddly enough, they explain what that is, but not until chapter 2. So somehow that got like a little wonky. But if we go forward here, sorry, to chapter 2, I went too far. There we go. Half steps and whole steps. There you go. So a half step on a keyboard is literally the next key. And that's it. Like, don't make it harder than it is. So I'm going to move some stuff around here so I can write on this page. So if you are, say, on this E, and I'm going to, I need to get my pen going here. There we go. You have an E right there, and someone says, oh, hey, move up a half step. You're going to go to this key instead, the F. If someone says, go 1/2 step up from A, we know this is A. 1 half step up from it would be this black key right here. It's just the very next key. So when we are looking at the layout of the keyboard, what we have is a white key, followed by a black key, followed by another white key, black key, 2 white keys in a row. And then we get black, white, black, white, black, a couple white keys in a row. And then it keeps going like that. So when you say move a half step, it just means go to the next key. And that can be in either direction. So let's say that we had keyboards out and we're going to play the keyboards. And I said, hey, find a D. And so you find a D and you're like, here's a D, and you press that key. And then I say, actually, you know what? Move a half step down. Down is always going to be to the left on a piano. So instead, the next key to the left is this black key right here. So that would be a half step down from D. Or I might say, actually, no, I changed my mind, go a half step up. And up is always right on the keyboard. So you would go to this key because that's the next key after the D. So literally the next key over, whichever direction you're going, doesn't matter. Sometimes people are like, oh, well, that's easy. A half step is just from a white key to a black key. Not necessarily true. Most of the time it will be the case. If you're going up a half step from this F, you would go to this black key. We've got G here. If you were going up a half step from that, that's a black key. Now I've got A. If you're going up a half step from that, you'd end up on this black key. But if I told you, hey, go up a half step from B, you're actually going to end up on another white key. So don't assume that a half step is always going to be a different colored key. Most of the time it will be, but not 100% of the time. Now also on this page, they explain a whole step. 2 halves make a whole. So if you move 2 keys, either to your right or your left, you have moved a whole step. 2 half steps equals a whole step. Okay, fine. So that's just a distance thing. Like it's literally a physical distance of moving from one spot to the next, either left or right. So I am now going to go back to 1.4. So we get that sharp symbol. It tells us there that raises a pitch a half step. The example that they use at the bottom of the page is G. So pull my pen back up. There we go. This note right here. If you use the every good boy does fine method, then we know that that is a G. And then we come down to the keyboard and they have been kind enough to go ahead and label it for you right there. When you put that sharp symbol that looks like a hashtag, which you see right here, that means instead of playing the G that I circled there on the keyboard, you're actually going to play the note just to the right of the G. And of course you can see there's an arrow there already, but it's pointing to this black key right here. So G sharp is actually the black key to the right of the G. Now, if it were C sharp, say on this staff we had a C, but with a sharp with it, we know this is C. So then that would mean the note that you would actually play would be one to the right of it, that black note right there. If you were asked to play an A sharp, first thing you do is you find your A, there's one right there. A sharp, it's going to be that black note, just one to the right of the A. So once you see that hashtag sign or that tic-tac-toe sign, it just means find where that key is on the keyboard and then move up one key to your right. All right, let me erase all the stuff I scribbled on here. Next one in the list there is called a flat. And if you look at that flat symbol up there, where it explains what it is, it looks sort of like a lowercase b, but it's sort of pointy on the end instead. So it's almost like a stick with the right-hand side of a heart attached onto it. That's going to do the same thing as a sharp symbol. You're just going to go the opposite direction is all. So we have right here the G with that flat sign with it. So that means if you were going to play that on a piano, you go find a G. Of course, again, they've labeled it on there for us, which is very nice of them. And you would go one key to the left of it. That's actually the G flat right there. Same thing, let's say instead of up there, let's say you had a B flat. So you go find your B, which is right here. But then because it had the flat sign with it, you'd actually play this key one to the left of that B. So if it's a sharp sign, looks like the tic-tac-toe sign, you're going to go one to the right, which is up or raising the pitch. If you have the flat symbol, then you're going to go the opposite direction. You're going to go to the left, which lowers the pitch. And when I say raises and lowers, that means like the sound. So for instance, the G, I'm sitting here at my piano actually, sounds like this. If I go to that black key one to the right, it sounds just a hair higher. Right, I'm going to go back to the G. The G flat, that's one to the left. So you listen to it. Here the pitch just slides down a little bit, not a whole lot. It's the next key over. But that's what that's going to sound like. Now, double sharps and double flats are exactly what they sound like. Double sharp is like a sharp, but instead of moving one key to the right, you're going to move two keys to the right. You're just going to double it. Double flats, same thing. A flat moves you one key to the left. That means for a double flat, you're going to move two keys to the left. We don't see a ton of double sharps and double flats in this class. We won't use them very much, but occasionally we need them. It's one of those things that's sort of a necessary evil, so it's good to know about that. When you look at the representations of them in the list, you'll notice the double flat, I mean, it just kind of makes sense. One flat looks like a lowercase b, double flat looks like two lowercase b's, but notice the double sharp actually does not look like two sharps. Instead, it looks, it's like an X with some fancy little things on the tips. It almost looks a little bit like an asterisk. So for some reason, the double sharp is extra special and gets its own symbol, whereas the double flat is literally two flats next to each other. Now, the fifth bullet point there talks about the natural symbol. And in some ways, it looks maybe a little bit like the sharp, but with some parts missing. So it's kind of like a capital L and then an upside down capital L attached to it on the right. It tells you there that natural symbol cancels out any other accidentals that may have occurred earlier in a measure or in major key signatures or minor key signatures. Okay, so key signatures are something that are going to happen later, so just don't worry about that at all. But right before that, it does say earlier in a measure. And this is one of these problems with this book, again, is that it just assumes that you know what a measure is, but I'm not going to assume that you know that. So I'm going to go over, I have a picture over here of some staves that I can write on. There's a picture of the keyboard there at the bottom. When you see print music, it doesn't matter if you're using treble clef or bass clef. I'm just going to draw a treble clef because I don't know, that's just the one that I'm going to pick. Move my stuff here. Can't get it to move. Okay, my drama treble clef right there. When you see print music, there will be various notes, right? So high ones, low ones, I'm just gonna make some scribble marks. And then you'll see a line that like cuts off the whole staff. And then you have some more music, whatever it is written in here, and then you'll see another vertical line like that. And then there'll be some more music and then another vertical line, and it continues on and on and on like that. Those vertical lines divide the staff into like boxes, essentially. So each one of these sections is called a measure. So this one is a measure from the beginning up to there. Sorry, it's hard for me to write on this iPad. Some of the writing's sloppy. That's a measure. So each one of those little sections is a measure. It's an organizational principle that makes it easy to navigate your way through the music, because print music is often like pages and pages and pages and pages. So rather than just having like a gazillion notes one right after the other, we chop it up into little sections to make things easier to find. Those are what the measures are called. So let me erase that because I'm gonna come back and write other stuff on it here in a second. Get that off of there. Good deal. Okay. So back to accidentals. All right, the natural symbol. All right, it says cancels out any other accidentals that may have occurred earlier in a measure. So this is sort of a conventional way of print music and how it works. If you are in a measure and you have, let's say, something like a C sharp, from that point forward, all the way up until the end of the measure, any of the other C's are automatically C sharps as well. The printers will not put a sharp sign in front of each C. They'll just put it in front of the first one, and then if you encounter any C's again for the rest of that measure, they're still C sharps. Same way with flats. If you say have I don't know, like an A flat in a measure, any remaining A's that appear in that measure will also be A flats. It won't be regular A's, even though there's not a flat in front of them. Once it's flat measure, it just carries through. The problem is sometimes you want an A flat in your measure, like say if you're composing something and later in the measure you want just regular old A, you don't want an A flat again. So what you can do is cancel it out by using this thing called a natural sign. It's right here. Oh, what am I writer on? There we go. Still not working. Ah, there we go. Got it circled. So that little sign goes in front of the note to say, hey, I'm canceling out the previous accidental that was applied to this note. So on the graphic that you see here, you have your G first, right there. That means you're going to play the G on the piano. Second note that you have, G flat. Since there's a flat in front of it, you're going to play this black note just to the left of the G. Now, if this were a song, I mean, it's only 5 notes up there, so it's not much of a song, but let's pretend for a moment that it is. Third note. If it did not have that natural symbol in front of it, let's pretend that natural symbol is not there, then that note would actually also be a G flat because it was a G flat before. But whoever composed our little 5-note song here didn't want the third note to be a G flat, so he canceled out that flat by putting in this natural sign, and that makes it go right back to G. Okay, fourth note. Now our composer wants it to be a G sharp. So sharp means you play the one to the right. So you play this one right here. And then last but not least, at the very end, if that natural wasn't there, let's say that did not exist, then this G would actually be a G sharp because it retains whatever came before it. But composer kind of like, nope, I want a regular G there. So they cancel out the sharp that came before it by putting that natural sign in. And so that means you would then go back to playing this regular G. Orally, what does that sound like? All right, let me erase this stuff off of here. Whoops. Okay, so I'm sitting at my piano. First note is a G. I'm gonna draw a little arrow to it. So it sounds like this. Second note, G flat. That's one to the left of the G, so I'll go to the left. Third note, back to regular G. Fourth note is now G sharp. There's a sharp in front of it. You move one to the right. And then the very last note that you see there is back to a regular old natural G. So that's what it sounds like. So without all those crazy pauses, you get if I played it fast, it would sound like this, which has like sort of a little bit of a comical flavor to it, actually. Okay, so that's your sharps and flats. Biggest ones to remember: sharps, flats, naturals. Double sharps, double flats, don't have to worry about them so much. Although there are practice exercises at the end of this chapter and they use them there. But beyond that, you're just not gonna see them a lot. Like that's a good thing actually, because those are a little bit more involved. So, okay. So what I'm going to do then next is go to the next page. So this is where things get kind of interesting. Sometimes we're moving to the right, sometimes we're moving to the left. What this then means, I don't know if anybody picked up on this yet or not, is that these keys then have two different names. So what it shows you here at the top, written on the staff next to the treble clef there, they have written a C sharp. And then right after it, they wrote a D flat. So they look different. They're notated differently on the staff. They end up being the same key on the piano. Because if you have a C, which is right here, that's actually a C sharp, that means you got to go one key to the right. So you're going to go to that black key. But you got a D for the flat. That means you go one to the left, which means you'd also go to that black key. So they all have two names. And I know some people are like, oh my gosh, this is going to be hard. Don't make it harder than it is. I'm going to go over and I'm going to write in a different spot. There's an F here. There's a G there. This black note that is between them. It is to the right of F, so it could be called F sharp. But it's also to the left of the G, so it could be called G flat. Obvious question to ask at this point is like, well, why? Why don't you just call it one or the other? Like, why do you need two different note names for the same key? So there's this thing called tonality, and that's where you have, you may have heard of like major chords and minor chords, and they have like this particular sound to them, depending on whether or not they're major or minor. When you're in a particular key, and when I say that, I don't mean like literally the key on the piano, but there's this broad idea of sound. When you're in a particular key, sometimes you use sharps, sometimes you use flats. So keys are based on scales. We will learn about scales further down the road. But some scales use sharps and some scales use flats depending on how they're constructed. And we like to keep things as codified as possible. So once you start seeing sharps in a piece of music, you kind of have a tendency to want to keep seeing sharps and vice versa. If you're looking at a piece of print music and you're seeing a lot of flats, then you kind of expect to continue to see flats. Not that they can't be mixed, they can, but it would be really, really hard if you have like two notes with sharps in front of them and followed by one with a flat, followed by two more with sharps, followed by three with flats, followed by another one with a sharp, and maybe six of them with flats. Like it'd just be going back and forth all the time. So the idea is you try to use mostly one or the other, depending on what scale your music is based on. Some of them are going to use those sharps, some of those are going to use flats. And so to give you an idea too of what like keys sound like, and like I said again, I'm not talking about the piano keys, I'm talking about this overarching idea. I'm going to play for you Mary Had a Little Lamb in the key of C. It sounds like this. Now, if you're a singer, you might be like, well, that's a little low for me. Can we do that in a higher key? So I'll be like, oh, okay, I'll transpose it up to F major. So then F major, Mary Had a Little Lamb sounds like this. Still Mary Had a Little Lamb, I just moved it up a little higher on the keyboard into a different key, and now maybe that jives with somebody's voice type a little bit better. By the way, the first key that I played it in, the key of C major, that actually has no sharps and no flats. Then I transposed it up to the key of F major. F major has flats in it. If I kept going up and did it in A major actually has sharps in it. So it just depends on what it is. And we'll learn how to build those scales and how that works later. The idea here is to show that having a black key that has two different names is not just completely arbitrary, right? F sharp written there would get used in keys that use sharps. If you're using keys that have flats, you would call it G flat instead. Figure 1.5.1 down at the bottom there, it tells you this is going to occur with all of the black keys on the piano. So C sharp and D flat are shown to you there, but this one right here, this black key, white key on either side of it is D and E. Since this black key is to the right of D, it could be called D sharp, or it could be called E flat because it's to the left of the E. All right, this one, uh-oh, I've got some extra markings on here accidentally, sorry. This one we already did. This one, on either side of it, we have a G and we have an A. Since that black key is to the right of G, it could be called G sharp. Since it is to the left of the A, it could be called A flat. And then the next key up, next black key, this one right here. On either side of it, we have an A and a B. Since that black key is to the right of the A, we call it A sharp. Since it's to the left of the B, it could be called B flat. Now, this doesn't just apply to the black notes because, take a look at this. Let me erase some of this out of the way. Right here, we have B. So what if someone says, well, actually, I don't want you to play B, I want you to play B sharp. Remember, if it's sharp, you got to go one key to the left. Well, or sorry, one key to the right. If it's sharp, well, the next key to the right is right there. It's another white key. And we usually refer to this as C. But it has a second name too. It could also be called B sharp. And that like sort of blows people's minds sometime, I think. Same thing, this one, this B could be called C flat because it's one to the left of the C. So it's not something that just applies to the black notes, also applies to the white notes as well. Now, something I want to talk about here that will be helpful for you to know when you are writing stuff on quizzes. I'm going to go over to this staff paper again to show you. You'll notice, I think, I keep saying things like A sharp or E flat or F sharp or D flat, whatever it is. I'm always saying the letter followed by the accidental. Okay, so just for good measure, I'm going to use bass clef because we haven't given it very much love here. So I say, hey, I'm going to do C sharp. On the staff, when I write it, it's going to look like that. And here's what you need to notice. When I'm labeling it, letter comes first, the accidental comes second. When I speak it, I say the C first, and then I say sharp second. But when it is on the staff, the accidental actually comes first. And that is for a reason. We do read music from left to right. So if you have a bunch of notes in a row, and I'm just gonna put like random ones up here. If you were to put the accidental, say, after the note, I'll put another flat there, I'll put a sharp here. Since you're reading from left to right, you're going along, here you come. And the next note you play is this C, but then you get past it and go, oh, wait, whoops, it was actually supposed to be a C sharp, but you're too late. You already played the C because that's the first thing that you saw, right? And then you get like further this way and you're like, this next note, oh, that's a D right here. I'll play this D. Only to realize, oh, there's a flat after it. Oops, I played the wrong one. I was supposed to play D flat. So we write it like this in the actual music. That's a funny looking arrow, sorry. I'm gonna color it in because it's weird. We always put the accidental in front of the note on the staff. That way, when you're reading from left to right, you see the accidental first, so it automatically warns you, hey, this next note is actually altered. Sharp, of course, it's altered to the right, one to the right. If it's a flat, it's altered. It's going to be one to the left. So that's the only time that happens is when it's on the staff, the accidental will come first. Otherwise, you label it by putting the letter first and the accidental second, and then you speak it that way too. You'd say C sharp. So that was just in something that was important to point out, because what often happens is people will do things like they'll write the sharp after it instead, or when they label it, they'll call it sharp C. This one goes over here, this one goes over here. So it's only on the staff when it comes first. Any other time, speaking and writing it, it's going to come second. The other thing to point out that you may not have really paid much attention to so far is the placement amongst the lines and spaces of the accidentals. So let me get all this erased off of here. So I'm going to go back to treble clef just because if you have a space note, say, if you're going to put a sharp in front of it, that sharp also has to go in the space. If you're going to put a flat in front of it, the bubble part of the flat, it needs to go in that space as well. The little stem will stick up a little too high, but that bubble part of that flat symbol needs to match. if they're line notes, so I'm going to pick D. Since the line goes through the middle of the D, that then means the line has to also, the line also has to go through the middle of the sharp. If it's a line note and you're putting a flat with it, the line has to go through that bubble part of the flat. So we say that we have line notes and space notes. We kind of have line accidentals and space accidentals as well. They do match. So what you don't want to do, I'll come down here to the next line, is let's say you have this note, this E, but you actually want it to be E flat. You can't write it like in the vicinity, like above it, around it. Maybe you have it in front of it, but it's like sort of over here, right? That's actually on the line, whereas the note is on the space. So it does have to match. If that note is in the space, the bubble of that flat's got to be in there too. When we use the Note Flight software, it will actually place everything for you perfectly. But when you're taking quizzes, you have to manually write things in. So those are really good rules to know. Initially at the beginning, I'll be a little bit lenient and make like notes on your quizzes. Be like, don't forget placement of your sharps and flats, or I'll write something like, oh, you have a floating flat. That's what I would call this flat right here. I'd call it a floating flat because it's like, well, it's near the E, but it's kind of floating in the vicinity and actually isn't like right in front of it in the same space. Leniency at first, eventually they'll be counted wrong because the ones that look like this, just they don't exist in print music. So that's good to know. Okay, so I'm gonna go backwards again. We were just doing the notes and showing how they can have two different names. The terminology for that is enharmonic. So at the top it says enharmonic notes. Oftentimes what you will hear me say, oops, sorry. You'll hear me say enharmonic equivalence, which does mean the same thing in the end, but sometimes I use that terminology instead. So in the graphic here, we've got C sharp and D flat. They're considered equivalent enharmonically because if you say, oh, hey, Dr. Sell, play that C sharp, I'm gonna do this. And then you go, oh, wait, no, I changed my mind, play the D flat. Guess what? I'm still playing that same note. So visually on the staff, they look different, but functionally in terms of what you press on the piano, it actually ends up being the same key. Okay, so then section 1.6 is where you get to practice some of this. Section 1.6 has some similarities to what you'll see on a quiz, but this section is actually way harder than what you're going to see on a quiz. So they have you like do everything like to the nth degree. We don't necessarily need all of that, but I'll explain as we go what you need to like grasp onto and take with you and what you can leave behind. Now in section 1, there at the top, it says for each note on the piano keyboard, specify the note name and octave register. You will do something like this on the quiz. The difference is you will not be expected to name the octave register. You'll just have to label the notes. That's it. So number 1 down here, it's the very, very first note on a keyboard. That's an A. And then you go to number 2. If you want, you can be like, okay, A, B, C, D, E, F, right? You could do it that way. Or remember that sheet that we looked at in class that identified groups of 2 black notes, groups of 3, groups of 2, groups of 3. There's that pattern there. And remember, it showed you that every time you have a group of 3 black notes. The white key just ahead of it is an F. So sure enough, there's a group of 3 black keys. This white key just ahead of it is an F. One of the other methods then that I gave you additionally last week was you could use the Oreo method. Oops, I need to reset that. Every time you have a group of 2 black notes, the white note in between, there's one more, white note in between is always going to be a D. So called the Oreo method because it's like you have like the 2 chocolate cookies with the creamy white center, right? So in this case, for this one, that's the note they're asking for, right? This one that's right between, so that's going to be a D. And then if you want, you can go for E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. That's a long way. We know we've got C, D, that's an E. And then you can work your way up from there. So then you end up with an A. And then if you count your way up from there, then for number 8, we'll get G. You have a pretty big gap after that, but if you keep working your way up, you'll land here at number 9 on A. And then a bit of a gap again, working your way up. You do end up on B for number 10. Last note then on the keyboard, this one right here is a C, and then it ends. That picture there has all 88 keys. Something super important to know for the quizzes is that you will not get a picture of the keyboard with the entire 88 keys, mostly because it's super small, which makes it sort of hard to see. You'll get a cross section of a keyboard. So what you'd want to do is use one of those methods for figuring out what the key names are, because you can't just be like, okay, well, the first one to the left is always going to be an A, and then I can go A, B, C, D, E, F, G after that, because you might get a cross section of the keyboard that's like this wide. This first white key here on the left is not an A, that's a C. You can see the group of 2 black notes that are there. And we know the one white note in the middle of that is a D. So then that means this one's a C. So don't just automatically assume the first one on your left is always going to be an A, because it's not true. On an actual full keyboard, when we play them, then it'll be true, but in pictures, not necessarily. So that's just really something good to be aware of. Now, the next section down here, section 2, we will do 1, 2, 3, and 7, 8, 9. These other ones, 4, 5, 6, 10, 11, 12. Those are those other clefs that we briefly explored last week. We're not going to use them in this class, so we only need to do those 6 there. Again, the octave register, it's not something you're going to have to worry about. All I care about is whether or not you could tell me it's an A, B, C, D, E, F, or G. So for number 1, then here, that's a space note names for treble clef or face, that F, A, C, E. So we know that's an E. Second one, this is one of the ones that's a bit trickier because it is a ledger note. We do know the top line of the treble clef is an F. And we know that because every good boy deserves footage. Since we know that's an F, next space would be G. Line is A. Space is B. Line is C. And then we get up here to this space note, we've got a D. And then our third one here, face, just like we had before, it's in the bottom space, so that's your F. Then we can skip over to number 7, space note again, but now we've changed to bass clef. Remember the saying for space notes and bass clef is all cows eat grass. That all cows eat grass, G. Same method for this space note here. It's the bottom one, so A. And then we get to this ledger line note. So we know that the top line of the staff is an A, and we know that from Good Burritos Don't Fall Apart. The Good Burritos Don't Fall Apart. Top line is A. And then we have to work our way up the alphabet from there since we have this higher up ledger note. So since we know we have A, space is B, line is C, space is D, next line where the note is, that's an E, so your answer would be E there. Number 3 at the bottom, this is way harder than what you are going to see on any quiz in this class. So because we do have things called double sharps and double flats, then a lot of the keys on the keyboard actually have more than 2 names. They're gonna have 3. And that's what they're showing you here. So in the example that they initially give you to show you how to do it, they give you a B. And that's the given note. And so when we get to these other ones, you see those are your given notes. I always recommend labeling them. It's a good idea. Now, the next 2 notes that you see here that are in these boxes, those are the enharmonic equivalents. So that means the other possible note names for them. And then they also ask you to draw them as well. In this case, they wrote the kinds of notes that like colored in and have the little stems on them. I would just stick with the hollow notes because they're faster to write, if that were me. So, okay, what does this look like when we're actually doing it there? So, all right, so number 1, we've got to identify this note. It's a space note in treble clef. It's the bottom space, so we know that that is an F. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip over back to this page. And well, the first thing I'm going to do is erase some of this stuff to get it out of the way. Okay, so the note that was given was this one. And we know it's an F. So what we do then at that point, we go down to the keyboard and we find an F. At this point, it doesn't matter what F that it is, as long as it is an F. So I'm going to choose this one right here. There's my F. I now have to come up with 2 other names that I could call that F. So one method that you can use is fill in the letter names on both sides of it. This is the one we're trying to determine. Now that we've got the F and the G written there, you can see this F is actually 1 to the right of E. So it could also be called E sharp. The G, though, it's not 1 to the left of G, it's 2 to the left of G, because there's 1 to the left. And then if you go again, there's 2. So this one could also be called G double flat. So if I go back up here and I write that, E sharp, G double flat, now I got to draw them. So I know that E is right here. And my G is right there. And remember, I put my accidentals in front of them. Now for that E sharp, sometimes people are like, well, there's also an E up here. Can I write it up here? And the answer to that is no. It's literally the same note on the keyboard. So if you were to do the next E sharp up, you would actually be writing the one like this one up here. Got to keep it in the same range. So notice these are all drawn very, very close together there. This one's tricky, definitely tricky on this one. All right, let me erase this. And I'm gonna go back to the practice exercises. And let's get all of the given notes first. So number 2 here, we have an E flat. Number 3, we have an A. Number 4, we have an F sharp. So we've got the E flat, the A, and the F sharp. I am then going to, whoops, go over here. So given ones that we had, an E flat. The next one we had was A. The next one we had was F sharp. All right, so the first one, E flat on the keyboard, we gotta find it. Remember, flats are one to the left of the letter. So first thing you gotta do is find an E. Here's one right here. We don't actually want E, we want E flat. So one to the left of that A, that's your E flat right there. So that black key, we've got to find 2 other possible names for it. So currently we know it's called, oops, it's called E flat. All right, we kind of draw around it. We know it's already called E flat, right? It's to the left of the E, but it's also to the right of the D. So you could call it D sharp. Then this is where it gets tricky. It's like, well, what else can I call it? It's like if I use C, that's up 1, 2, 3. So that's not a possibility. If I use F, so I can go backwards 1, 2. That's like flatting it twice. That's a double flat. You could also call it F double flat. So now we know those are the names. D sharp, F double flat, and then when we draw them up here, and I'm sorry, my drawing is so terrible. It's gonna look like that. Next one down, we have the given A. So let me erase all of this stuff out of the way. Got to find an A. Here's one right here. I need 2 other names for that. I always recommend going on either side of it and figuring out, okay, can I use those letters? Yeah, actually, if I take this G and I go up 1, 2, sharp the G twice. All right, so we could call that a G double sharp. Double sharp looks sort of like an X. From the B, if I backed up twice, 1, 2, flat it twice, could also call it B double flat. And then drawing it. Sorry. There's your B double flat there. Then last one, F sharp. We have identified, from before that was an F sharp. Got to find it on the keyboard. We know this is F, but we want F sharp. Remember, sharp is 1 to the right. So this is actually our F sharp right there. Label it. All right, and that came from knowing where the F was. So let's fill in on either side and see if we can use those. It's called F sharp because it's one to the right of F, but it's also one to the left of G. So it could also be called G flat. From the E, you can actually sharp it twice. 1, 2 to the right there. So you can also have E double sharp. And then writing it, G flat right there. I'll go over here to the side a little bit since E sharp is right there. When you see this on a quiz, you're not going to have to do that. First of all, you're not going to have to give me 2 different alternative note names. You're only going to have to give me 1. And you're also not going to be expected to draw them either. So on a quiz in our classes, you might see something along the lines of an arrow pointing to a note accompanied by the question, give me 2 different names for that note. Okay, so you might see something like that. In other cases, you might just get a straight up question. You might get it that says, what is the enharmonic equivalent of D sharp? So then what you would have to do is go find a D sharp. First you find D, 1 to the right, that's your D sharp. So then it's asking you what's the enharmonic equivalent of D sharp. So you got to come up with the second or a second name for that note. It's to the right of D, but it's also to the left of E. So then you would just simply write, oh, the answer is E flat. You do it that way. You're not going to see on the quizzes the double sharps and the double flats. You're not going to have to write the notes in. I just need you to demonstrate the very basic, oh, this has a second note name, you could call it this. And that is good enough. We will do more of this in class on Thursday. We'll also get the keyboards out because then you can actually like poke around on them and sort of figure these things out with the physical aspect of it, which is sometimes helpful for people to actually be able to touch the keys and move around on them. So that'll be the game plan for Thursday. If you do have any questions about any of this, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. Also keep an eyeball on the Blackboard announcements because our supplemental instruction tutor, Bianca, is putting stuff on Blackboard to let you know when she's holding tutoring sessions. So that's always good to know. Of course, you can always come and see me as well. If for some reason my hours or Bianca's tutoring hours don't really jive with your schedule, please reach out anyway to one of us because we will do what we can to be able to accommodate you because we want to make sure that you get this stuff down pat. Okay, so I think that is everything I have for you. So I will plan on seeing you on Thursday. Okay, bye.